So the last episode of season 3 of Sherlock happened, and hmm, hmm. Yeah, okay, it was good. It was a bit weird. Much like the previous episode, a lot of it seemed really out of place until the end and when it all came together. I've really had trouble placing my thoughts on that episode. It was quite surreal and seemed to take quite a long time to get to a relatively inconsequential outcome. And the best part probably was the Moriarty reveal in the last couple of minutes. But much like the previous episode, a lot of it seemed really pointless. It didn't make a lot of sense until it all came together at the end. Yes, it was really cool. The Mind Palace, when he got shot, that was very cool. But it was kind of wondering why we're lingering on this for so long. And then obviously at the end, the reveal means, oh, that's why we needed to understand that concept in order for that other element to make sense. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but essentially that's what it means. And that problem had that problem with the second episode as well, in that why are we lingering about all these dithering storylines as Sherlock speaks at the wedding, but then it all made sense at the end because it all came together. So it's not bad. Neither, they're both got their same elements. Good episodes, but you don't realise they're good until the end, at which point you might already be thinking, oh, this isn't very good. Am I making sense? Very hard to review. Anyway, with that shambled mess of a review, let's move on to talk a bit more about Sherlock. I'm going to be going into details. Big spoilers in this video. Big spoilers, especially for Elementary. Big spoilers. So let's look at our Sherlocks in more detail, and first up, it's clear that it's impossible to talk about modern Sherlock Holmes without approaching the subject of drugs. Yes, Doyle Holmes was a casual drug user, and whilst it's nice that we're grown up enough to be able to add that in now, it's clear we're still far too squeamish to treat it with the flippancy that Doyle did. So this element has either been used to comic effect, dramatic influence, or a combination of those. As far as I'm aware, Holmes' drug use never plays a particularly significant part in any of Doyle's stories, and Holmes only really did it when he was bored, but please do correct me if I'm wrong about that. Anyway, whilst we can have Holmes partaking, we can't allow ourselves to see him enjoying, because God forbid there should be a balanced view being portrayed on these things, so our three Sherlocks come to some interesting compromises. Before the last episode, Sherlock treated drugs as a throwaway reference. We know he did it, so chuck it in there because we wouldn't want to be accused of not being the trendy one. In the last episode, the subject reared its ugly head again, but was curiously cast aside once the story proper kicked in. And I'm not sure if it was entirely clear if Sherlock was using his past addiction to assist with the case, or if he was using the case to assist with his addictions. But as I say, that line of inquiry didn't really go anywhere, though it was nice to see. The movies, of course, can afford to be much more cavalier, not being quite so restrained by censorship as television is, but they still want to be fairly family-friendly, so they can't simply have Holmes dishing out the cocaine. So instead opted to have him as a creature of experimental success, consuming unusual substances, many stolen from Watson's medical bag, for the purposes of comedy rather than anything else, and to show he is basically prepared to try anything to help focus his mind. Arguably, in the first movie, getting high is what actually helps him crack the case, but it's never explicitly said what he was up to. Elementary, on the other hand, is neck deep in drugs. When we meet Holmes, he is fresh out of rehab and Watson is meeting him as his sober companion, a kind of live-in sponsor. I don't know if this is actually a thing, but it works well enough here. Holmes is tormented by his drug addiction, viewing it as his one great weakness, the thing that nearly destroyed him, and he has moved to New York to try and make a fresh start for himself. I can't overstate the importance of this. I'm pretty sure it comes up every single episode, and if you didn't go out and solve crimes, you'd basically be watching a Bubbles spin-off from the series The Wire. So the message is drugs are bad, and as I say, Doyle never went into enough detail for that angle to particularly matter, but it's as good a character arc as any, and serves well to set this Sherlock aside from the others, as it makes him a much more grounded, sympathetic human being. Whilst most complaints about Elementary would seem to boil down Sherlock being much less of the superhero than people would like him to be, in a kind of rebellion against believable drama, I think the contrast between our two television heroes is a nice balance. All versions of Sherlock are in essence walking lie detectors. They are not geniuses on every subject as, say, Tony Stark would seem to be, but they see through people, seeing the lies people tell each other every day, and seeing they are surrounded by lies makes them withdrawn and distrustful of other people, viewing themselves above the rest of humanity to some degree. But this ability and this isolation has simultaneously caused them to fail to develop the ability to socialise. Seeing lies at every turn has caused them to misread the occasional importance of a lie, or when the truth would be inappropriate, and they have taken to assume that people lie because they are always up to no good. This mistrust of mankind is what occasionally trips Sherlock up and makes him socially awkward, the extreme version of this being the Sherlock of the BBC, who seems to almost purposefully say the wrong thing all the time, although it's often clear he doesn't mean to. We meet this Sherlock at the beginning of his partnership with John Watson, essentially the beginning of his story as we know it, and over the course of 3 seasons, this unlikely friendship with John has served to humanise him, and the character he is at the end of Series 3 is quite different from how he was at the beginning of Series 1. Undoubtedly having learnt his lesson, as being such a, let's not mince our words, to everyone around him is essentially what caused his downfall and allowed Moriarty to get the better of him at the end of Season 2. In Elementary, we are also meeting Holmes and Watson as they meet for the first time, but Holmes seems to have seen much more of the world and is a famous name in London as we are to understand, albeit a behind-the-scenes kind of fame. His reputation shattered by his drug addiction, he has made enough of a name for himself that he was able to move to New York and ingratiate himself to the police force there, having previously worked with Captain Gregson, head of homicide, who was happy to bring him on board and would appear to be the closest thing Holmes has to a friend. This Holmes is still socially awkward, but the distance he keeps from the rest of humanity seems to be more because of this, rather than that he isn't interested in them. He's significantly more sociable than the BBC's version, but is very aware of his own inability to say the right thing at the right time, and is actually much more of a sociopath than the BBC version, as he clearly views the world as an outsider, not fully understanding or appreciating the normal order of things, but smart enough to know that he has to play along as much as he can bear. An episode in Season 2 taking place around a kind of disciplinary hearing after Holmes' maverick actions have resulted in the near-fatal shooting of another character, being the best example of this. Whilst the BBC Sherlock is certainly of a particular mindset, he's such an over-the-top caricature that I don't see the show actually capable of going as deep on this as Elementary is. By contrast, in the films we are meeting Holmes and Watson deep into their relationship. They are old friends full of love and respect for each other, so deeper character work isn't needed here. We can jump straight into comedy banter and get the exciting action-packed case kicked off straight away. This is essentially the man-child version of Holmes, not especially socially awkward, just retreated from society because if he went and joined it, someone might actually try and make him grow up and behave responsibly. Him and Watson have an element of father and son about their relationship, with Watson being the patriarch. This creates a very different dynamic to the other versions, as it's clear that Watson is the stronger character of the two, and Holmes is a little more fun-loving and much less emotionally damaged than his televisual counterparts. This is pretty much exactly what he needs to be for the films, as the films are pretty clearly action movies. This Holmes is not half as infallible as the BBC version. In fact, he frequently seems to have no idea what he is doing beyond a strong skill for improvisation. He's actually more of your bog-standard action hero, who rather than getting by on luck as most action heroes do, he gets by on the innate ability to calculate the odds of any given situation in an instant and formulate the best course of action. In this regard, he's able to do the impossible things most action heroes do, except you actually believe him capable of doing them. He does spend less and less time Sherlocking in the second film, but it's still a lot of fun. Martin Freeman is easily the most rounded Watson, obviously hiding some deeper trauma from his day as a soldier that has caused him to pull away from family and friends. He stumbles into the life of Sherlock Holmes, someone equally as antisocial as him but for different reasons. It's kind of a well at least they have each other friendship in the first series, akin to a buddy movie, albeit an emotionally disturbed buddy movie. Jude Law on the other hand is a grown-up, who as we meet him in the first Guy Ritchie movie has effectively outgrown Holmes. It's a very different setup. Here we have long-time friends who know and respect each other more deeply than the BBC version likely ever will. Holmes has no contempt for Watson, they have nothing but affection for each other. The only issue they have is Holmes' inability to accept change, as when the movie opens we learn that Watson is moving out of Begg Street to start a family home with his wife-to-be, the wedding in question taking place in the second film. This wedding to Mary is repeatedly told to us as heralding Holmes and Watson's last case together. Despite this being far from the case in the books, indeed she was only Watson's first wife of 3 in the stories by Conan Doyle. Lucy Liu is probably my biggest problem in Elementary. There's nothing wrong with her, she plays it fine, just that she begins as something of a non-entity in the first series, largely an excuse for Sherlock to have someone he needs to explain things to, which from a writing 101 viewpoint makes perfect sense, but it feels a little lazy. We know that she quit being a surgeon for unresolved reasons at the start, but those reasons come out they seem a little weak. She does slowly evolve a character of sorts, becoming Holmes' protege, something of a detective herself, something that the other two versions of Watson never actually quite achieve, as this version is apparently gifted with many of the same talents as Sherlock, but they're thus far gone unfulfilled before conveniently meeting him. This does have the effect of lessening Holmes as a powerful character, which is a general complaint thrown at the show, but I don't think it's that big of a problem. Plenty has been said online about how films and television just don't seem to get Irene Adler, so I won't go into that here, I'll just look at the characters as portrayed. First of all, Adler of the Guy Ritchie films is much more the fan fiction favourite. As with the movie version as a whole, she's a more fun version of the character. An exceptional thief who, if not reaching towards Holmes on the intellectual scale, certainly has a few qualities he lacks that allows her to think around him. It's essentially portrayed that he is in love with her, and that means he lets his guard down, allowing her the opportunity to trick him. Although it isn't overly feminist-friendly to portray the only way a woman can get the upper hand on a man is her sex appeal. Speaking of which... so that happened. Guy Ritchie may have amped up the romantic angle, but I'm not even sure I can explain what they were attempting here. Essentially, the BBC version of Irene is a perpetually horny blackmailing terrorist who for whatever reason has developed a Holmes obsession. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad version of the character. I just think it's kind of silly in a lot of ways. The character works well enough, but naming her Irene Adler just seems like a name drop for the name drop's sake, because she's about as far from the character as you can get. Okay, maybe not as far as they take it in Elementary, spoiler alert, remember, but you see what I'm saying. In Elementary, we learn that Sherlock's descent into nasty old drugland was brought on by the death of Irene Adler, a woman he was strongly romantically involved with and who was brutally murdered by Sebastian Moran, one of Moriarty's hitmen. Moran also appearing in the Guy Ritchie movies, but bumped up to his rightful position as Moriarty's right-hand man rather than just another minion. Towards the end of the series, we meet Irene proper in flashback and learn that she was something of an art thief, although she did it for noble reasons. And primarily, Holmes just finds her outlook on life interesting, or at least more interesting than most people's. We do meet her again, as it turns out that in fact she's not dead, and she was kidnapped as a part of a scheme by Moriarty to drive Holmes slowly mad. However... Yes, surprise! Irene Adler was Moriarty all along. This is the big twist of the first season of Elementary, and it doesn't quite work. It's shocking enough and sort of clever, but as we only meet Irene right at the end of the series, we find we've not actually spent enough time with her to get a real punch in the gut from this reveal. Once it is revealed, Irene starts dressing a little more like a Nazi stormtrooper, converts to her natural accent, and begins enacting a devious plan that Holmes is powerless to stop, although it's not entirely clear why she gave him the option of being able to do so. I won't spoil how this plays out, just in case anyone here is now intrigued enough to want to go and watch the show. In regards to the other versions, Guy Ritchie offers a much more traditional take on the character, which works very well as a straight-laced, societally functional version of Holmes himself, whilst the BBC gave us proper nutter Moriarty. This Moriarty doesn't seem that similar to Holmes at all, and is so unhinged it's kind of hard to believe he was ever the mastermind of anything. But although a little annoying at first, the character is delightfully ridiculous in a jokery kind of way, and his final episode revealing his grand plan to dismantle Holmes is one of the best. Now, a number of other characters have appeared in all three, some of them which I've mentioned, Mrs. Hudson for example, and Sebastian Moran. And obviously Mycroft has appeared in all three. Mycroft's a slightly odd one. I personally think that his portrayal in Sherlock is probably the best. Stephen Fry was more of a throwaway character, a little more than a reference. And Rhys Ifans in Elementary, I'm not quite sure where that's going. Mycroft and Sherlock in Elementary really don't seem to have very much in common at all. And although it's revealed that Mycroft is up to something, I just kind of feel like we've diverted quite a long way away from the character here. Okay, this video is getting a little bit too long, so I'm going to knock it on the head here. That's my general thoughts on the show. If you wanted to share yours, please do comment below. Like if you like. Subscribe to my channel. I know there's still very little on it, but I'm hopefully rectifying that by the end of this week. There should be a few more things dotted about. This is a brand new channel, so I am building it up, but hoping anyone listening is enjoying what I've done so far. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and find me on Twitter and everything else. Links will all be in the description below. To my Twitter and Films Twitter and Films YouTube channel and all the other stuff, and keep an eye out for all my new videos coming up. Hopefully this week, a couple more videos, and then I'll start having a regular output starting next week. Fingers crossed. The end.